history remembers kings. It remembers great battles, mighty empires, and powerful rulers whose names have echoed through the centuries. Their victories are celebrated, their monuments stand tall, and their stories are told from one generation to the next. But history also forgets. It forgets the men and women whose courage never sought glory, yet changed the destiny of millions. It forgets the voices that challenged injustice, the leaders who sacrificed everything for their people, and the visionaries who built civilizations long before the world noticed them. Nigeria is a nation with one of the richest histories in Africa. Long before the borders of modern Nigeria were drawn, before colonial rule, and before independence, this land was home to remarkable civilizations, fearless warriors, brilliant leaders, and ordinary people who achieved extraordinary things. Yet many of their stories remain hidden. Some are buried beneath the sands of time. Others survive only in fading memories, old manuscripts, and the oral traditions passed down by elders. Today, we uncover those stories. We journey across more than 2,000 years of history to meet the forgotten heroes whose courage, wisdom, and determination helped shape one of Africa's greatest nations. Before we begin, if you enjoy discovering the hidden stories of Nigeria's past, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Every subscription helps us continue sharing the remarkable history that deserves to be remembered. Now, our journey begins not with kings or conquerors, but with a mystery. Travel back more than 2,000 years. Across the rolling grasslands of central Nigeria, communities were already thriving at a time when much of the ancient world was still taking shape. These people left behind no written records. They built no towering pyramids. Yet they created something so remarkable that archaeologists are still studying it today. They are known simply as the Nok. The Nok civilization flourished between approximately 1000 BC and 300 AD, making it one of the earliest known civilizations in West Africa. For centuries, their existence remained completely unknown. Then, in 1928, while miners searched for tin in central Nigeria, they uncovered something extraordinary. Hidden beneath the earth were beautifully crafted terracotta sculptures unlike anything ever discovered in West Africa. The figures displayed detailed hairstyles, expressive faces, elaborate jewelry, and remarkable artistic skill. Each sculpture seemed to tell a silent story from a civilization lost to time. But the Nok people were more than gifted artists. They were pioneers. Archaeological evidence suggests they were among the earliest people in sub-Saharan Africa to master iron smelting. With iron tools, they cultivated larger farms, built stronger communities, and produced weapons that transformed their way of life. Their innovations would influence generations that followed. Although historians still debate what caused the decline of the Nok civilization, their legacy lived on. As centuries passed, new kingdoms rose across the land. Dense forests in the south gave birth to one of Africa's greatest civilizations. Open savannas in the west witnessed the rise of powerful empires. Great trading cities flourished in the north, linking West Africa to distant lands across the Sahara Desert. This was not an empty land waiting to be discovered. It was a land of engineers, merchants, artists, scholars, warriors, and rulers whose achievements rivaled many civilizations around the world. Among these rising powers, one kingdom would become legendary for its military strength, political organization, and breathtaking works of art. Its influence spread far beyond its walls. Its craftsmen produced masterpieces that would astonish the world centuries later. Its rulers commanded respect throughout the region. It was the Kingdom of Benin. But while Benin grew in the south, another remarkable leader was preparing to change history hundreds of miles away. She would become one of Africa's greatest military commanders. A queen whose courage inspired generations. A woman whose name still echoes through history. Her name was Amina. And her story was only beginning. The world into which Amina was born was one of opportunity, danger, and constant change. It was the 16th century. Across the vast savannas of northern Nigeria, prosperous Hausa city-states flourished. These independent kingdoms were centers of trade, culture, and learning. Merchants traveled for weeks across the Sahara Desert carrying salt, cloth, leather, gold, and spices. Their caravans connected West Africa to North Africa and beyond, bringing not only wealth but also new ideas and technologies. Among these thriving states stood the Kingdom of Zazzau, known today as Zaria. Its people were skilled traders and fearless warriors. Every day, markets overflowed with goods from distant lands, while blacksmiths forged weapons and tools from iron. Farmers cultivated fertile land, and the kingdom's strategic location made it one of the most important commercial centers in the region. It was here that Princess Amina was born. She was the daughter of Queen Ransome-Kuti, a respected ruler whose leadership strengthened Zazzau. From an early age, Amina displayed qualities that set her apart. While many expected a princess to remain within the royal palace, she found herself drawn to the training grounds where soldiers practiced with spears, bows, and swords. She watched them with fascination. Before long, she asked to train beside them. At first, many were skeptical. Warfare was considered the responsibility of men, and few believed a young princess could endure the demanding discipline of military life. But Amina refused to be discouraged. She trained harder than anyone else. Day after day, she practiced riding horses across the open plains, mastering the speed and precision that cavalry required. She learned how to command soldiers, study battle formations, and anticipate an enemy's next move. As the years passed, her determination earned the respect of seasoned warriors. They no longer saw a princess trying to prove herself. They saw a commander in the making. When Queen Ransome-Kuti died, Amina's brother Karama became ruler of Zazzau. During his reign, Amina served as one of the kingdom's leading military commanders, gaining invaluable experience on the battlefield. She led successful campaigns, defended the kingdom's borders, and built a reputation for courage under pressure. When Karama died around 1576, Amina ascended to the throne. The people of Zazzau now looked to a woman for leadership during a time when neighboring kingdoms constantly competed for territory and influence. Many outsiders believed her reign would be brief. They could not have been more mistaken. Queen Amina transformed Zazzau into one of the most powerful kingdoms in West Africa. Leading her army from the front, she launched campaigns that expanded the kingdom's influence across vast regions. One after another, neighboring territories acknowledged Zazzau's strength. Trade routes became safer under her protection. Merchants traveled farther than ever before, bringing prosperity to the kingdom. Gold, leather, textiles, kola nuts, and other valuable goods flowed through Zazzau's bustling markets. But Amina understood that victory in battle meant little without security. Throughout the territories she conquered, defensive walls were constructed around towns and settlements. These fortifications became known as Genewa Amina, or Amina's walls. Although many have disappeared over the centuries, traces of these ancient earthworks can still be found today, standing as silent reminders of her remarkable achievements. Yet Queen Amina's greatest legacy was not simply the land she conquered. It was the example she set. She proved that leadership was measured not by gender, but by wisdom, courage, and determination. Centuries before many parts of the world accepted women in positions of military command, Amina had already become one of Africa's most celebrated warrior queens. Her name inspired songs. Her victories became legends. Generations grew up hearing stories of the fearless queen who rode at the head of her cavalry and refused to surrender in the face of impossible odds. Although history often focused on kings and emperors, Queen Amina's story survived because the people refused to let it disappear. Even today, children across northern Nigeria continue to learn about the woman who changed the destiny of Zazzau forever. But while Queen Amina's armies rode across the northern plains, another kingdom hundreds of kilometers to the south was quietly building a different kind of power. Its strength did not come only from soldiers. It came from extraordinary artists, skilled craftsmen, wise rulers, and one of the most sophisticated governments anywhere in Africa. Its capital astonished early European visitors. Its bronze masterpieces would one day become symbols of both African genius and colonial injustice. This was the Kingdom of Benin. Long before tragedy struck its gates, Benin stood as one of the greatest civilizations the African continent had ever known. For centuries, the Kingdom of Benin stood as a symbol of wealth, order, and artistic brilliance. Located in what is now Edo State in southern Nigeria, the kingdom grew from a small settlement into one of the most respected powers in West Africa. Its influence stretched across forests and rivers, while its rulers, known as Obos, governed through a highly organized system that amazed many foreign visitors. Unlike the common misconception that Africa before colonialism lacked sophisticated societies, Benin was a thriving center of government, commerce, and culture. Its capital city was carefully planned. Broad streets stretched for remarkable distances, lined with homes built in orderly rows. Massive earthworks and defensive walls surrounded the city, protecting its people from invasion. These walls, constructed over centuries, were among the largest man-made earthworks in the world. Within the royal palace, skilled artisans worked tirelessly. Using techniques passed down through generations, they cast intricate bronze plaques, carved ivory tusks, and created magnificent sculptures that recorded the kingdom's history. Every artwork carried meaning. Some celebrated great victories. Others honored ancestors, rulers, or important ceremonies. These masterpieces were far more than decorations. They were the written history of a civilization that preserved its past through art. As Benin's influence expanded, merchants arrived from distant lands. Portuguese traders reached the kingdom in the late 15th century, becoming some of the first Europeans to establish regular contact with the Benin kingdom. They admired its organization and craftsmanship, trading goods such as brass, coir beads, and textiles in exchange for pepper, ivory, and other valuable products. They were the written history of a civilization that preserved its past through art. As Benin's influence expanded, merchants arrived from distant lands. Portuguese traders reached the kingdom in the late 15th century, becoming some of the first Europeans to establish regular contact with the Benin kingdom. They admired its organization and craftsmanship, trading goods such as brass, coir beads, and textiles in exchange for pepper, ivory, and other valuable products. For a time, the relationship benefited both sides. But beyond the horizon, Europe was changing. Powerful nations competed fiercely for wealth, territory, and influence. As industrialization spread across Europe during the 19th century, the demand for Africa's natural resources increased dramatically. The balance between trade and domination slowly began to shift. European governments no longer wanted only trading partners. They wanted control. Across Africa, colonial powers divided territories among themselves, often without consulting the people who had lived there for centuries. Nigeria would not escape this growing storm. By the late 19th century, British influence had spread throughout much of the region. Through military force, diplomacy, and commercial agreements, Britain steadily expanded its authority. Yet the Kingdom of Benin remained determined to protect its independence. The Oba resisted attempts to surrender control over his kingdom's trade. British officials grew increasingly frustrated. Tensions mounted. Then, in January 1897, a British delegation attempted to enter Benin City despite warnings from the kingdom that sacred religious ceremonies were taking place and that the visit should be postponed. The expedition ended in violence, with several members of the delegation killed. In Britain, the incident was used to justify a massive military response. Just weeks later, a heavily armed British force marched toward Benin. The kingdom prepared for battle. But the weapons of the defenders could not match the firepower of a modern imperial army. As British troops entered Benin City, chaos erupted. Homes were burned. Sacred buildings were destroyed. The magnificent royal palace, once filled with centuries of history, was looted. Thousands of bronze plaques, carved ivory works, ceremonial objects, and priceless treasures were seized. These were not simply valuable works of art. They were the memory of a people. Crates filled with Benin's cultural treasures were loaded onto ships and carried across the Atlantic. Many eventually found their way into museums and private collections throughout Europe and North America, where they remained for generations. For the people of Benin, it was more than the loss of beautiful objects. It was the loss of a part of their identity. Even today, many of the Benin bronzes remain the subject of international discussions about cultural heritage, justice, and the return of artifacts to their rightful home. The fall of Benin sent shockwaves across the region. It became a powerful reminder that colonial expansion was no longer a distant possibility. It had arrived. Across the lands that would later become Nigeria, rulers, merchants, and ordinary citizens watched with growing concern. Some believed cooperation with the British offered the best chance of survival. Others believed freedom was worth defending at any cost. One remarkable man had already chosen his path years before Benin fell. His life had begun in chains. Yet through determination, intelligence, and extraordinary leadership, he rose to become one of the wealthiest and most influential rulers in West Africa. His name was King Jaja of Opobo. His story would become one of resilience, ambition, and one of the earliest acts of resistance against British colonial control in Nigeria. The story of King Jaja of Opobo did not begin in a palace. It began in tragedy. In the early 19th century, a young Igbo boy named Maneso was born in a small community in what is now southeastern Nigeria. Like countless children of his time, he grew up surrounded by family, tradition, and the rhythms of village life. But his childhood would not last. During a period when conflict between communities often fed the transatlantic and regional slave trades, Maneso was captured and sold into slavery. In a single moment, everything changed. Separated from his family and stripped of the life he had known, the young boy was taken far from home. He eventually arrived in the Niger Delta, where he was purchased by a powerful merchant involved in the region's growing trade. Many people in his position would have believed that hope had disappeared forever. But Maneso refused to surrender to despair. He observed. He listened. He learned. Possessing remarkable intelligence and determination, he quickly gained the trust of those around him. He mastered the complex business of commerce, learning how goods moved through the intricate network of rivers that connected the Niger Delta to the Atlantic Ocean. Over time, his abilities became impossible to ignore. He was given increasing responsibility, negotiating with traders, managing business affairs, and building relationships that would later shape his future. Eventually, he earned his freedom. It was a moment few enslaved people of his era ever experienced. No longer known simply as Maneso, he became Jaja. Freedom did not satisfy his ambitions. He wanted to build something greater. The Niger Delta was one of the busiest commercial regions in West Africa. European ships regularly anchored along the coast, seeking palm oil, a commodity that had become essential during the Industrial Revolution. Palm oil lubricated factory machinery, helped manufacture soap and candles, and was in enormous demand throughout Europe. Jaja understood the value of this trade better than almost anyone. Using his knowledge, discipline, and remarkable leadership, he established himself as one of the region's most successful merchants. But success often breeds rivalry. Disagreements over trade and leadership eventually led Jaja and his followers to leave the community where they had lived. Rather than accept defeat, they founded an entirely new settlement. In 1870, that settlement became the Kingdom of Opobo. Situated along important waterways, Opobo quickly developed into one of the most prosperous trading centers in West Africa. Its rise was extraordinary. Under King Jaja's leadership, warehouses filled with valuable goods. Canoes carrying palm oil traveled constantly along the rivers, while European trading companies competed fiercely for the opportunity to do business with his kingdom. Jaja believed that if foreign merchants wished to trade in his territory, they would do so on fair terms. He insisted that local people should benefit from the wealth created by their own resources. For a time, the system worked. Opobo prospered. Its influence expanded. King Jaja became one of the most respected and wealthiest African rulers of his generation. But success attracted unwanted attention. British trading companies wanted direct access to palm oil producers. They believed they could earn greater profits by bypassing African middlemen like Jaja. To them, his control over regional commerce had become an obstacle. British officials began pressuring him to open the trade without restrictions. Jaja refused. He argued that the agreements protecting his kingdom's economy were both fair and necessary. His resistance frustrated colonial authorities. Negotiations grew increasingly tense. Then, in 1887, British Vice-Consul Henry Johnston invited King Jaja to what was described as a peaceful meeting aboard a British ship. Jaja accepted the invitation in good faith. Instead of respectful negotiations, he was arrested. Without warning. Without a fair trial. Without the opportunity to defend himself. He was accused of obstructing British trade and immediately removed from his kingdom. His people watched in disbelief as their king was taken away. From the deck of the ship, Jaja looked back toward the homeland he had built through years of sacrifice. He did not know he would never rule Opobo again. The British exiled him first to the Gold Coast, in present-day Ghana, and later to the island of St. Vincent in the Caribbean. Thousands of kilometers separated him from the rivers that had made his kingdom prosperous. Yet even in exile, King Jaja refused to admit that he had been wrong to defend his people's economic independence. Years later, permission was finally granted for him to return home. But fate had one final cruelty in store. In 1891, while traveling back to Nigeria, King Jaja fell ill aboard the ship. He died before reaching the kingdom he loved. The people of Opobo mourned deeply. Their king had risen from slavery to build one of West Africa's greatest trading states, only to lose it because he refused to surrender control of his nation's wealth to a foreign power. His story became one of the earliest and most powerful examples of economic resistance against colonial domination in what would later become Nigeria. Today, King Jaja is remembered not simply because he ruled a prosperous kingdom, but because he proved that determination, intelligence, and courage could overcome even the harshest beginnings. His life reminds us that true leadership is measured not by the circumstances of one's birth, but by the choices made in the face of impossible odds. As the 19th century drew to a close, however, the British tightened their grip across the region. Kingdom after kingdom came under colonial rule. Traditional rulers found their authority restricted. Ancient institutions were reshaped. And across the land, a new generation began asking a dangerous question. Could Nigerians one day govern themselves again? One young engineer, surveyor, and journalist would become one of the first to answer that question with an unshakable yes. His name was Herbert Macaulay. Herbert Macaulay was born on November 14, 1864, in Lagos, at a time when British influence along the coast of West Africa was growing stronger with each passing year. Few could have imagined that the young boy would one day become one of the loudest voices challenging colonial rule. Macaulay came from a family deeply connected to education and public service. His grandfather was Bishop Samuel Ajayi Crowther, the first African Anglican bishop, a man whose remarkable journey from enslavement to international respect had already inspired countless people across the continent. Growing up in Lagos, Herbert displayed an inquisitive mind. He excelled in mathematics, engineering, and drawing, skills that eventually earned him a position in the colonial public works department. On the surface, it appeared he had everything needed for a successful career under British administration. But the longer he worked within the colonial system, the more he witnessed its inequalities. He saw decisions affecting Nigerians being made without their voices. He watched valuable land taken from local communities. He observed laws that favored colonial interests while ordinary Nigerians struggled to make their concerns heard. Many accepted these realities as impossible to change. Herbert Macaulay did not. Leaving government service, he turned to journalism and public advocacy. His pen became one of the most powerful weapons in colonial Nigeria. Through newspapers, speeches, and public meetings, Macaulay criticized unfair taxation, challenged land seizures, and demanded greater political representation for Nigerians. His words spread quickly through Lagos. To ordinary citizens, he became a fearless defender of justice. To colonial officials, he became a persistent troublemaker. The British frequently monitored his activities. He faced legal battles, public criticism, and even imprisonment. Yet every attempt to silence him only strengthened his resolve. Macaulay understood something many others had not yet realized. Political freedom would not arrive on its own. It had to be demanded. As public support for his ideas grew, he helped establish organizations that encouraged Nigerians to take a greater role in shaping their own future. In 1923, he founded the Nigerian National Democratic Party, the first political party in Nigeria. Its goal was revolutionary for its time. It called for greater African participation in government, expanded educational opportunities, and fair treatment under colonial law. Although elections during the colonial era were limited, Macaulay's movement gave many Nigerians something they had rarely experienced before: a political voice. Across Lagos, crowds gathered to hear him speak. He possessed a gift for explaining complex political issues in language ordinary people could understand. His speeches were passionate but purposeful. He urged Nigerians to believe in themselves, reminding them that no nation could progress if its people remained silent in the face of injustice. As the years passed, younger activists began looking to Herbert Macaulay for guidance. Among them was a brilliant young nationalist named Nnamdi Azikiwe, who would later become one of the leading figures in Nigeria's journey to independence. Macaulay recognized that the struggle would require more than one generation. He devoted much of his later life to mentoring younger leaders who would continue the fight long after he was gone. By the 1940s, the demand for self-government was growing stronger. Across Africa, people were beginning to question why foreign powers should continue ruling nations thousands of miles from Europe. The winds of change were gathering. Although Herbert Macaulay would not live to witness Nigeria's independence, his ideas laid the foundation upon which future generations would build. When he died in 1946, thousands of mourners lined the streets of Lagos. They were not simply honoring a politician. They were saying farewell to a man who had dared to imagine a free Nigeria long before such a dream seemed possible. History would eventually remember him as the father of Nigerian nationalism. Yet while political resistance was gaining momentum in Lagos, another extraordinary movement was unfolding in western Nigeria. This movement was not led by soldiers. It was not driven by wealthy merchants or powerful chiefs. Instead, it was led by market women, teachers, mothers, and ordinary citizens united behind one fearless woman. Her name was Funmilayo Ransome-Kuti. She believed that justice belonged to everyone, regardless of wealth, status, or gender. At a time when many women were expected to remain silent, she chose to raise her voice. And before long, thousands of others would raise theirs alongside her. The movement she inspired would become one of the greatest acts of peaceful resistance in Nigerian history, proving that courage does not always carry a sword. Sometimes, courage simply refuses to be silent. Margaret Ekpo was born in 1914 in Creek Town, in what is now Cross River State. She grew up during a period of profound change, as colonial rule reshaped the political and economic landscape of Nigeria. From an early age, she understood the importance of education, discipline, and service to others. These values would guide her throughout her life. As a young woman, Margaret trained as a teacher before later studying domestic science in Ireland. The experience broadened her understanding of the world and strengthened her belief that education could transform not only individuals but entire communities. When she returned to Nigeria, she settled in ABA with her husband, Dr. John Udo Ekpo. It was there that her journey into public life truly began. Her husband often attended meetings where educated Nigerian men discussed politics, colonial policies, and the country's future. Margaret noticed something troubling. Although women made up a large part of the population and played essential roles in society, their voices were almost completely absent from these discussions. Their concerns were rarely heard. Their opinions were seldom requested. Margaret believed this had to change. Instead of remaining on the sidelines, she began organizing women in ABA, encouraging them to understand their rights and participate in public affairs. She visited markets. She held community meetings. She listened carefully to the everyday struggles of traders, mothers, and working women. Many complained about unfair regulations, poor living conditions, and policies that affected their businesses without their input. Margaret helped them realize something powerful. If they remained silent, others would continue making decisions on their behalf. But if they stood together, they could influence the future. Her message spread quickly. Women who had never imagined themselves involved in politics began attending meetings in increasing numbers. Margaret encouraged them to register to vote wherever possible, speak confidently, and demand fair representation. She believed democracy could only succeed if everyone had a voice. Her growing influence soon earned national recognition. As constitutional reforms gradually expanded political participation in Nigeria, Margaret Ekpo emerged as one of the country's leading female politicians. She was elected to public office, becoming one of the first Nigerian women to serve in a legislative role. In every debate, she advocated for better education, healthcare, employment opportunities, and equal participation for women. She reminded her colleagues that a nation could never reach its full potential if half of its population was excluded from leadership. Her speeches were thoughtful rather than confrontational. She persuaded through reason, compassion, and an unwavering belief in justice. Young women across eastern Nigeria began to see her as proof that leadership was not reserved for men alone. Margaret's work also strengthened the growing movement for Nigerian independence. She understood that political freedom from colonial rule would mean little if ordinary citizens were still denied opportunity and equality. For her, independence and social justice belonged together. By the 1950s, calls for self-government could be heard throughout the country. Political parties organized rallies. Newspapers published passionate editorials. Students, workers, traditional rulers, and community leaders debated what the future should look like. Nigeria stood on the edge of history. Among those leading the movement was a man whose courage in the halls of government would earn him a permanent place in the nation's story. His name was Anthony Enahoro. Unlike many activists who worked mainly through protest or newspapers, Enahoro chose another battlefield: the legislature. He believed that words spoken inside the chambers of government could be just as powerful as demonstrations in the streets. Born in 1923 in Uromi, present-day Edo State, Anthony Enahoro displayed remarkable intelligence from an early age. As a young journalist, he wrote boldly against injustice and colonial rule. His articles attracted attention because they challenged ideas many considered too dangerous to question. The colonial government frequently viewed outspoken journalists with suspicion. Yet Enahoro refused to soften his message. He believed Nigeria deserved the right to govern itself. As his reputation grew, he entered politics, joining a new generation of leaders determined to secure independence. Then came the moment that would define his legacy. In 1953, standing before the Legislative Council, Anthony Enahoro introduced a motion calling for Nigeria to become independent. It was one of the boldest political acts in the country's history. Not everyone supported the proposal. The debate that followed exposed deep political disagreements between different regions of Nigeria. Tensions became so intense that the motion did not immediately succeed. But something important had changed. For the first time, the demand for independence had been placed firmly before the nation. The question was no longer whether Nigerians wanted freedom. The question had become when that freedom would finally arrive. Although several more years of negotiations lay ahead, Anthony Enahoro had helped set the course from which there would be no turning back. The dream of an independent Nigeria was no longer a distant hope. It had become an unstoppable movement. As Nigeria moved steadily toward independence, one voice continued to speak for those who were too often ignored. That voice belonged to Aminu Kano. Born in Kano in 1920, Aminu Kano grew up in one of the great commercial and cultural centers of northern Nigeria. From an early age, he witnessed the sharp contrast between privilege and poverty. He saw wealthy elites living comfortably while many ordinary farmers, laborers, and traders struggled to provide for their families. These experiences shaped the course of his life. Unlike many politicians of his time, Aminu Kano believed that true progress would not be measured by the wealth of a few, but by the opportunities available to ordinary people. Education, he believed, was one of the greatest tools for building a stronger nation. He encouraged young Nigerians to learn, question, and participate in public life. As the movement for self-government gathered momentum, Aminu Kano became one of the country's most influential political thinkers. He founded the Northern Element Progressive Union, a political movement that challenged long-standing inequalities and called for reforms that would benefit the common people. His message was simple but powerful. A nation could not become truly independent if its citizens remained trapped by poverty, injustice, and exclusion. Across northern Nigeria, thousands listened to his speeches. Farmers, market traders, teachers, young students. Many saw in him a leader who understood their daily struggles and believed that every Nigerian deserved dignity and opportunity. While leaders such as Herbert Macaulay had awakened the spirit of nationalism, and Enahoro had boldly demanded independence in the legislature, Aminu Kano reminded the nation that freedom also carried responsibility. Political independence would only be meaningful if it improved the lives of ordinary citizens. As the 1950s drew to a close, negotiations between Nigerian leaders and the British government intensified. Delegates from the northern, western, and eastern regions met repeatedly to discuss the future of a country unlike any other in Africa. It was a land of hundreds of languages, hundreds of cultures, many religions, many traditions. Bringing these diverse peoples together under one nation would not be easy. Yet despite their differences, one goal united them: freedom. Then, at last, the historic day arrived. October 1, 1960. As midnight approached, thousands gathered in Lagos. Crowds filled the streets. Families stood shoulder to shoulder. Many had waited their entire lives for this moment. As the Union Jack was lowered for the final time, a new flag slowly rose into the night sky. Green. White. Green. For countless Nigerians, it was more than a flag. It was a symbol of hope. Hope that future generations would determine their own destiny. Hope that the sacrifices of so many men and women had not been in vain. Among those who had made this day possible were leaders whose names are widely remembered. But standing beside them, in spirit, were countless others whose contributions history has too often overlooked. Queen Amina, whose courage proved that leadership knows no gender. King Jaja of Opobo, who sacrificed everything to defend his people's economic freedom. Herbert Macaulay, whose fearless words awakened the spirit of nationalism. Funmilayo Ransome-Kuti, who showed that peaceful resistance could change society. Margaret Ekpo, who opened the doors of politics to generations of Nigerian women. Enahoro, whose determination kept the dream of independence alive. Aminu Kano, who reminded the nation that freedom must serve every citizen. Their stories are not simply chapters from the past. They are reminders that courage can begin with one voice. That justice often starts with one person refusing to accept what everyone else believes cannot be changed. Today, Nigeria continues to face challenges, just as every nation does. But the legacy of these remarkable men and women lives on in every citizen who believes in fairness, opportunity, and the promise of a better future. History remembers those whose names are carved into monuments. But sometimes, the greatest heroes are those whose legacy lives quietly in the freedoms we enjoy every day. They may have been forgotten by many, but they should never be forgotten by history. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this documentary and want to discover more of Nigeria's hidden history, forgotten heroes, ancient kingdoms, and untold stories, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new documentary. Until next time, remember that every nation has stories waiting to be rediscovered, and together, we'll continue bringing them back to life.